Good evening and welcome to the India Story. With me, Vikram Chandra. On this program, we bring you the latest developments in the world's largest democracy for a global audience. And it has been a week filled with big news stories, ranging from a video from Manipur that has finally galvanized the entire nation into action. Also, it was a week when the alliances for the 2024 general elections began to take a final shape. But also this week, our focus is on the booming online gaming industry in India, which attracts more than 421 million users and which was expected to grow at around 19% per annum. Now, GST rates on the industry have been increased to 28% on the total ticket size, which has led to anguished protests from the industry. Others feel that this is good because higher taxes will stop people from getting addicted to online gaming. It will be treated like gambling and you have to try and control that in some way. Now, joining us to talk about that right here in the studio, Ashish Grover, founder and CEO of CricPay, and Dev Rana, co-founder of Humans of Football, a community-based organization that conducts e-football events. We also have Dipali Pant Joshi, former executive director of the RBI. Another big story we're going to be looking at this week is the breakthrough in cancer research by Mumbai-based SAR Labs. They claim to have developed a non-invasive blood test that can actually detect tumors long before they form. Potentially, that could save millions of lives. We will be speaking to the founder, Ashish Tripathi, about the promise that this technology holds. And finally, we have an exclusive interview with the team behind the hit Netflix show Kohrra, which has received rave reviews for its layered characters and its storytelling. We talked to actor Varun Sobti and the director-screenwriter Sudeep Sharma. But let's begin this program by taking a close look at some of the big stories that have been making news in India this week. And I'm going to start with Manipur. A shocking, horrifying, nauseating video. 3 months old violence leading to 160 deaths and political posturing. This, of course, is Manipur that we are talking about. A few days ago, a video emerged on social media of 2 women being paraded naked by a mob of men. They were being groped, and at least one of them was allegedly gang raped after that particular video. All of this led to frenzied action and horror all across the country. The Prime Minister broke his silence. The Lok Sabha went into a breakdown on the first day of the monsoon session over the incident. Calling the act an incident that shamed India, the Prime Minister said that there would be the strictest of action against the perpetrators. Meanwhile, there were demands for the resignation of the Chief Minister, Biren Singh. He also came out and said that he was going to be asking for capital punishment in this particular case. But is this an isolated incident? Let's remember, the internet has been blocked in the state of Manipur for more than 2 months, and that's something that people have been questioning. Why? Because it is very possible that other such horror stories have gone unnoticed. The Chief Minister himself said it. He said there have been hundreds of FIRs, so you don't really know how bad the situation has been. Remember, since the 3rd of May, the day of the first protest march against the Meitei tribe's demand for scheduled tribe status, the state has seen continuous violence. The majority Meitei community and the tribal Kukis have been at loggerhead for generations, but it's now spiraled into violence. Earlier, the clashes were for resources. In earlier history and later, then the fighting became about political representation and government SOPs. This time, however, the fight has come out into the open. It's become the cause of social unrest and actual violence. Now, what have we seen? The military has been deployed in parts. Curfew has been imposed to try and control the situation. Now, the new video, purportedly from the 4th of May, has, of course, sent shockwaves globally. But it also leads to broader questions. What actions can a civilized society and its laws take to return basic decency back to the victims, to give some justice to the families of the dead? And then there are broader questions also. Yes, this video has spurred everyone to come out and talk about it. The National Human Rights Commission has finally woken up out of its slumber and has asked about this. You've had various government institutions coming out and talking about it. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court said if the government's not going to act, then we're going to be coming out and acting. You've had the Chief Minister saying that capital punishment should potentially be considered in this case. And perhaps most important of them all, 4 arrests were made. Within a few hours of that video coming out, 4 arrests were made. But that also begs the obvious question, why did it require a video to come out on social media? Why did it require nauseating and horrifying pictures to be placed before India and before the world, before those arrests were made, before actual action was taken on FIRs that were actually filed 2 months ago? That's a major question that we are all going to have to think about. Surely it shouldn't require either videos to come out or for there to be media attention before steps and decisive steps are taken to make sure that acts of violence like this cannot happen. And a second question that I think all of us have to think about is that, yes, I can completely understand why you might have to have clampdowns on the internet and on social media. Why? Because the internet and social media can be used to trigger and instigate fresh violence. Sometimes that is exactly what happens. WhatsApp groups or Facebook or Instagram being used to instigate violence. But sometimes what can also happen is, as happened perhaps in this case, if those pictures and those videos are not coming out, if the media is not doing its job, if people are not finding out what is actually happening in a particular place, then a long period of time can be spent and wasted before action is actually taken. And in that time, lives can be lost, decency can be violated, the rights of women can be stamped upon, and absolute horror stories like this can actually play themselves out. So I guess there's a balance somewhere that is going to have to be found, and we're going to have to think about that really, really closely. But for the moment, these are just some of the statements that have been coming out in the last 2 days since that video came out. All right, let's move now to another significant development this week. 26 opposition parties have joined forces to form the coalition that will now be named India, or the Indian National Developmental Inclusive Alliance. This is, of course, in the run-up to the 2024 Lok Sabha elections. Now, let's just examine the key takeaways from the recent meeting of the opposition alliance. The 26 parties, including the Congress, the Trinamool, the CPM, the JDU, the Shiv Sena, Uddhav Thackeray, the Aam Aadmi Party and many others, are going to be campaigning and contesting the elections under a single powerful alliance, aiming to present a united front against the ruling BJP and the NDA alliance. Now, the crucial decisions, of course, will have to be seen whether the alliance can actually field a common candidate on every Lok Sabha seat to challenge the BJP and the NDA's candidates. The next meeting of the India grouping is going to be held in Mumbai, and before that, basic questions will still have to be addressed, of course. Questions like who's going to be the opposition's potential candidate for a prime minister, or if that's a question that is far, far away, who's going to be the convener of this particular front. A committee of 11 members is going to be formed to lead to many of these issues and to have constant consultation. Now, it's worth noting that some key members of the opposition, including Naveen Patnaik, KCR, Jagan Mohan Reddy, Mayawati, have all chosen to stay away from this meeting. Now, is it short term? Will they eventually be part of this? Or will some of them, like the JDS, perhaps end up in the NDA? Now, that's, of course, an open-ended question. While all of this is happening, the NDA, led by the BJP and Prime Minister Modi, also held a meeting. It was a grouping of 38 parties that came together to consolidate that NDA alliance. And now the big question, of course, that we're going to be trying to figure out over the next 10 months or so, can the new opposition India alliance overcome all the odds right now and take on the NDA and spring a surprise in the 2024 election? We'll keep tracking that story very, very closely. Another story that we've been tracking: Japan has become the second Quad partner after the United States to sign an agreement with India for the joint development of the semiconductor ecosystem. This will include design, manufacturing, equipment research, and talent development. The agreement was signed between India's Union Minister for Electronics and IT, Ashwini Vaishnav, and Japan's Minister of Economy, Trade and Industry in New Delhi on Thursday. Vaishnav said that the government has started discussions with Japan's state-backed semiconductor industry body, Rapidus, for collaboration in the segment. With around 100 semiconductor manufacturing plants, Japan is among the top 5 countries to have a semiconductor ecosystem. So this tie-up is a major step forward in India's efforts to become a global hub for the semiconductor industry and to also be linked into that entire system in a systematic manner. It will also provide access to Japanese expertise and technology. The US, of course, has firms aiming at spurring semiconductor manufacturing in India after the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit last month. So a tie-up with the US, a tie-up with Japan, both of them members of the Quad along with India. What lies next? Talks with Taiwan, perhaps South Korea, I don't know. But there's a lot of excitement around semiconductors, and we will keep updating you on that particular story. And now our special focus. The GST Council unanimously decided to impose a 28% GST for online gaming for casinos and horse racing, where GST will be levied on the full face value of the placed bets. 28% is, of course, the highest goods and services or GST tax slab. The earlier rate was 18%. So the increase is significant, but what was even more significant was the fact that it was on the entire value of the bet, and that's what got some eyebrows to be raised. So the government, of course, defended this entire move, and the GST Council and GST finance ministers across the board have been saying this was done unanimously, essentially saying that online gaming and gambling should be taxed as a sin good. And therefore, this was necessary both for raising revenue as well as to crack down on what was called illegal gambling. Now, the industry has disagreed with that, saying that a higher tax will not be effective in cracking down on illegal gambling because all of this is in any case regulated, it's out there, it's in the public. And if you do crack down on this, players will end up moving to illegal areas or moving to offshore platforms that are not subject to Indian law. Now, the gaming industry has written to the finance ministry urging for a reconsideration of the decision. Some reports say that the GST Council is saying that a review of the decision is unlikely, but other reports are saying that the METI minister, for example, will also be asking for a review. So why has this become such a controversial issue? Where does that actually leave the industry? Let's just dive into some of the issues behind all of this. Great to be joined right here in the studio by Ashir Grover, who's the founder and CEO of CricPay. Been really agitated by what is happening. Dave Rana is with us, co-founder of Humans of Football, who's going to talk about it a little bit from what gamers are feeling about this. Dipali Panjoshi is also joining us, former executive director of the RBI. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for joining us. Ashir, why don't I just start off with you first to understand what is happening. What is the situation earlier? It was 18% on what? On the actual income that was coming to the gaming industry, and now it's 28%, but on the full value of the transaction. Is that a fair summing up?
Yeah. So Vikram, that's correct. So what was happening till now was, let's say there was a pot of 100, and the gaming industry was keeping 10 out of it. So we are paying GST on that 10 part, which is technically our revenue. So we're paying 1.5 rupees out of that 10, and we are net taking 8.5. Now with the new rule coming in and the way it's being read, it means even before the game starts, you have to give 22 rupees GST. So that 1.5 rupee becomes 22. It's a 1300% increase. And that's where the concern of the industry is, that how are we going to absorb this 1300% increase in GST itself?
But GST means, of course, it should be on the value add, right, that is being provided. So you will be able to get set-offs and things like that, I guess. But you're saying that you should, am I understanding you in saying that that earlier it was on the specific amount that you were getting, now it's on the entire pot, and is that your real problem?
Yeah, that is the real concern, because if you look at other industries, right, and I keep comparing it with, it's not a direct comparison, but let's say if you talk about stock exchange, right, if you trade stock, you are paying GST on the brokerage, not on the stock value, right? It's the same in case of mutual funds. Let's take the case of real estate, right? Now, if you've got a broker, he gets you a house, and if the government asks the broker to give, even 18% on the overall value of the house, that's more than his brokerage, 10 times his brokerage. So that's where our concern is, that the principle of GST has always been on value added. So why in this case is it being applied on the whole pot?
So you're saying that if there's 100 rupees that is being put in as a bet, what would you like? Are you arguing that the rate should not be 28, should be 18? Is that your bigger concern? Or is your bigger concern it should only be on the amount that you're getting and not on the full pot? Which would be your bigger concern, or both?
See, of course both are concerned, but the lesser concern, I would say, is the rate increase from 18 to 28. I think if it was only that, we might still be unhappy, but we could live with it. The challenge is that the base on which that 28 is being applied is the real concern, which completely changes the economics. 14 rupees extra is now going to go as tax from the pocket of the gamer to the government. So earlier, if you were playing a game of 100, the winner would have won 28 rupees. Now he's going to net win 14 rupees. And because that return comes down, would the gamer be excited enough to play anymore is our real concern.
All right, what we've heard the Karnataka finance minister, for example, just saying yesterday was, he said that, but if you do that, you only put it on the amount that the industry is making, then the effective rate on the overall pie comes down to less than food, for example, or drink, or anything else.
No, it's unfair, as I said, right? See, if you look at food, right, it's being grown, right? So it's coming from the ground. So everything is value added in that sense. But I would more compare it with investments and stock exchange and anywhere where money is involved. Classic example, I used to run a payments company, right? Now, as a payments company, when we used to charge the MDR, we used to pay the GST on the MDR that we used to charge as payment company, not the total payment made by the customer.
Okay. How does this actually work from the point of view of gamers? Because frankly, one of the major things in this is this entire question of what is a game of skill and what is a game of chance. And there is a certain amount of confusion between the two also. Obviously chess would be a game of skill. Yeah. Obviously, if you're just betting online, doing poker, it's a game of chance. Now, somewhere in between is this entire question of how are you selecting a team and what is the best fantasy cricket, and that is somewhere in between there. So how is it going to affect gamers?
See, what happens now is, for the gamers, they will bear a huge burden of the taxation that has been implemented, rather than, say, the companies that are bearing it. And that will make gaming inaccessible to them. And to put a blanket ban is saying, say, online gaming, treating online gaming as a blanket segment and just putting a blanket tax on them. It is making games inaccessible to the gamers. I ran a small survey. I have a community of gamers with me, about 40,000 gamers that are associated with the organization that I co-own. And we ran a small survey over there. And of the 10% of the sample size of the entire community, 75% of the people said they will not be able to engage in further events and leagues and tournaments, provided that these taxes are implemented, the GST is implemented the way it has been proposed. So this is a huge number, 75%, and the remaining 25% also split in between. 12.5% of the people, they say that maybe they're not sure whether they will be continuing to play or not. So when you talk about numbers in general and a good sample size of that, and when you expand that to, say, the entire community of gaming that is there in India, which is 400 million people, to 400 different individuals that are engaged in some sort of gaming or the other. It is a huge impact on a lot of people that are looking to get into something.
Yeah, but when it comes to what people are doing with it, if I'm to play devil's advocate on this, right, it could be argued that a lot of people who are gaming are essentially just gambling. There's not real skill involved. They're not doing anything else. They're just putting in money and it is therefore gambling. So is that a distinction that needs to be drawn? What are people actually doing online?
I think the distinction that needs to be drawn is between gambling and a game of skill. Now, the difference between, when you say a lot of people are gambling, that should not impact the people who are genuine gamers. That should not impact the people. Say, when something like this is monetized, there are winnings involved. Winning is a very small portion of it. There's a huge aspect of it which is just core gaming, which are people trying to get entertainment value out of something. Now, what happens is, for example, when I was growing up, there were playgrounds everywhere. There was accessibility of playgrounds. There were people who were going out in the evening and playing. That culture has gone down. I think we can all agree that culture has gone down. So kids are looking for alternatives. Now, why should these kids be punished who are looking to get into core online gaming.
So the question will be that if you're not doing it for money,
Right.
then there's no GST or anything involved, right? If you're just playing a football tournament or a
Right.
chess tournament online just
Right.
for, I don't know, rewards,
Right.
then there's no money in it, there's no GST in it, so that is not being affected. It's only where there's actual money involved and winnings involved that this issue comes in.
The thing is, the competitiveness of something comes in only when there is money involved. You talk about any major tournament that even takes place globally today, any esport tournament or anything. It is all oriented, there is a cash prize involved, which is the major catch of it. And that is how it becomes competitive. That's how people want to improve and essentially improve their skill, which we are not recognizing in the online gaming right now.
So the money is essentially the reward. Ashid, on this point, we've heard, I mean, obviously, Metis have been looking at this and they've been asking about a framework because the big question is how do you differentiate between pure gambling, which could then be classified as a sin good, which is really the argument that is being made out here. This is a sin of some sort or the other and it should get higher taxation. Pure gambling would be a sin. Pure skill should not be considered a sin. How do you regulate it? What's the framework? And we're hearing, for example, the GST Council and others saying, oh, it's not beyond our, I mean, it's above our pay grade. How do we figure out ye hai ki nahi hai?
Yeah. So see, the industry has been around for 10 years and things have evolved. And unfortunately, the way the industry has evolved is that we have gone to the courts. And at the courts, we have sort of proven what is a game of chance or gambling and what is a game of skill. But there's no legislation which has been brought by the government. So there's been no debate on it, whether in the upper house or the lower house. In fact, till a few months back, we thought we, as an industry, were getting more and more recognition because, frameworks were being put on when the tax would get collected. For example, there's a clear framework now on when do we need to deduct TDS, how much of that TDS has to be deducted. So we thought that things were moving in the right direction, and the government was also recognizing us as an industry. But out of the blue, this has come and hit us. And I think it's good to have that debate on what is a game of skill, what is a game of chance. But that's best had at the parliament. And for that, someone would have to bring a bill. But in this case, what has happened is by bringing this punitive tax in some sense, the industry has been shut down without even having that debate.
Okay, shut down. Right, let me just go to Dipali Joshi now, former director, executive director of the RBI. Dipali, the argument that we are hearing here, and let's face it, this is the GST Council that has done it. So, in a sense, there is some sort of all-party consensus, if you like. It's not just one party or the other party that's done this. But this entire question of sin goods and gaming and gambling and online gaming is in some way a sin good and therefore should attract punitive or very high taxation, certainly taxation at the highest bracket. What would be your take on that?
You see, I agree. I don't agree with your distinction between skill and chance. I completely agree that the change in valuation and the computation, the sudden computation, makes taxation excessive, and there is an element of repeat taxation. So this cascading effect. For instance, if I go to Las Vegas and I decide to have a flutter at the tables, I pay just once for the casino. I buy my chips and then I sit at the table and I don't gamble, by the way, but just in case I was to. But here I am an online gamer. I win 2,000. Again, I have to pay GST on the second game which I play. So that is unfair. So that I want to make a very clear distinction. You have 28% GST. All right, fine. I pay up my 28% GST. You cannot tax my winnings again and again. So you can't keep this on par with a casino. Okay. Casino versus online gambling, either you keep it at par, one-time payment. Even if you're a gamer in the US, you just pay for the device, so you pay one time. You don't pay on your winnings.
Okay.
So that cascading effect is what I object to.
Okay, Dipali Joshi, let me just try and come to get where we think this is likely to head. You, ma'am, were former executive director, RBI. If you were given the task right now to say, okay, look, there's obviously industries pushback, as we were just hearing. We know what the GST Council is saying. METI is saying, okay, help us to make a framework. What would you do in this entire situation? What would be a fair way out?
I do not want this entire business to move out of the country and go offshore. I do not want the state to lose revenue either. I'll stick to the 28%. I will see that there are no aberrations and anomalies in its imposition. And at the same time, I would evolve a framework where I would have the industry players tell me what to do. I'm a regulator.
Fine. I think it's a fair point to make. Don't drive it offshore, and by the way, also don't drive it illegal, because as we've seen, horse racing, which is what it's been equated with, fine, it happens, it's controlled. But cricket betting, for example, when something goes illegal and goes underground, then it has its own impact. Where do you see this headed? Just a quick comment, final comments from both of you.
I'm not sure where this is headed, but I do think that there should be consultation with the prominent players in the industry. There should be consultation with gaming communities as to what their requirements are and whether how impacted are they by the decisions that are made, and will they be disassociated with the entire gaming community as it is, the global gaming community, because there is a lot of resource that exists here. And when I say resource, I mean as skills. Online gaming is a skill. It is. And
some of it is. Not all of it.
No, not all of it. Some of it is.
Yeah.
And that should not be jeopardized by putting a blanket GST taxation.
Ashade, last word from you. Where do you see this headed?
See, what I would like the government to do, and when I say government, I'm speaking in general, is that they need to come up with a framework which gets debated. Right? I think what needs to be done is that to put this decision in abeyance. Until that time, you come up and have a complete debate, holistic debate on what gaming is, what game of skill is, what game of chance is, and come up with a legislation. Now, when a legislation comes in, then there's no ifs and buts.
And by the way, that could be then expanded. You could also look at some of the things that I was saying about, like, for example, what should happen on actual betting on matches. It's illegal, which is why it's in the hands of the underground mafia and other stuff.
Exactly.
Maybe you regulate that, legalize that in some way, and have real punitive taxation on that.
See, the thing is, if a gamer wants to game, right, you don't want a situation where in India, people open these WhatsApp shops where you're just sending them money on UPI and then hoping you win and get the money back, and there's no tax collected on it.
Yeah.
So the gaming will continue irrespective. You have to recognize that at first. Either it'll move offshore, which is our currency going overseas and having an effect on the dollar rupee exchange rate, or it becomes illegal, where you'll have more and more cases of these online frauds happening.
Okay. So regulate it and do that, and I guess so there obviously has to be a correct framework for all of this. Probably good for everybody, including the government, because the more this thing stays regulated, is there onshore, and the government is collecting a fair amount of taxation on it, and the industry keeps growing, probably best for everybody concerned. But thank you all so much for joining us with your different perspectives. Let's take a look at what is expected out here. This, for example, is what we are hearing from the government and the various voices as to what is likely to happen here. And remember, this is a GST council. So as I said, it's not central government or state government. It's across the board. It's the GST council that's actually taken this decision and taken it unanimously.
Online gaming, horse racing and casinos will be taxed. They will be taxed at 28%, each one, and they will be taxed on full face value. Whatever be the decision on each of the game being either skill or chance-based, or being both or being neither, is not what we are looking at. We are purely looking at that which is being taxed, because it creates value, profit is being made, or a wager is being levied. Based on the wager, people earn windfall, which is what is betting all about. So that's what we've been talking about, and therefore today's decision looks at that aspect of what is to be taxed at what rate.
And let's turn now to our regular segment where we track what the global press has been saying about India this week. And let's start with this particular report in the New York Times. I guess a lot of the coverage continues to be linked to the Prime Minister's visit to the United States and then to France. So the New York Times really has a long article about the diaspora and the role that it plays. It says in this report that while the Indian Prime Minister has a strong tie with the diaspora, the New York Times feels that some strains are emerging due to concerns about what it calls the Modi government's Hindu-first policies, despite the economic progress being made back home. The New York Times article says that the diaspora has played a significant role in supporting Mr. Modi, but it says there are also appeals for moderation and inclusivity. Le Monde says in its latest report that the invitation to the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and that rapturous reception that he actually got in France did raise some questions in France. It says that some concerns were expressed about the Modi government's treatment of minorities. However, Le Monde says the visit was part of France's long-standing relationship with India, as France views India as a key player in shaping a multipolar world and a natural counterweight to China. Le Monde says that despite all the controversies, the invitation underscores the complex geopolitical considerations and partnerships involved in international diplomacy. Moving on to the Financial Times, where there's a two-part article being written by leading economics commentator Martin Wolf. And in the first part, he says he predicts that India is going to be rising as a great power with a US-sized economy by 2050. By 2050, and he says that's why the West's bet on India is a good bet to make. He says he foresees a sustained 5% GDP growth yearly, attracting companies in a China plus one strategy. He said that Western leaders see India as a counterweight to China, drawn by its young labor force and by the economic potential. He said that India's GDP per head is projected to reach 30% of the US by 2050, making it a formidable economic player. In this next part, Martin Wolf says he's going to be talking about India's future as a liberal democracy. So we're going to wait for that particular article coming out next week. And now another special focus this week on the India story. Cancer. It's a brutal illness that has affected so many people's lives in one way or another. But there continue to be rays of hope on the horizon to help cancer patients. This new breakthrough, for example, which could perhaps help save millions of lives around the world. It comes in the form of a simple, non-invasive blood test that has been developed by Mumbai-based Epigeneres Biotech Private Limited in collaboration with Singapore-based Zar Labs. It claims to have developed the world's first pan-cancer imminent detection blood test. With just a few drops of blood, the test makers say that they can detect cancerous stem cells before they become a tumor with nearly 100% accuracy. Now, that's, of course, a major claim to make. The potential of targeting stem cells to detect imminent cancer was published in a peer-reviewed paper as an article in January this year. Now, clearly, further trials have to be done, but this screening test is available in the team's Mumbai labs. So let's now talk to Ashish Tripathi, the CEO of Zar Labs, to discuss the scope and the importance of this new cancer test. Well, Ashish, thank you so much for joining us. And these are very major claims that are being put forward by Zar Labs. If this actually works out, it could be a major landmark shift. Just tell us a little about it, because obviously if you can detect cancer early, it has a significant bearing on the prognosis and on how effective treatment can be in curing cancer.
So Vikram, firstly, thank you for having me. And, a lot of people don't realize that cancer is already the biggest killer in the Western world. It is actually the second biggest killer after cardiovascular diseases today. But that said, I think that statistic does not do it justice. The kind of cost that it causes to the patient, to the system at large, is prohibitive. And the way to understand this disease is if you just look at the statistics, if you can catch the disease early, the survival rates beyond 5 years go through the roof, right? It is above 95% in the Western world for many cancers, so long as you catch it early. And the cost to the patient is relatively negligible, as opposed to if you catch it late, the cost of the chances of survival beyond 5 years is less than 5%, and the cost to the patient and the system is prohibitive. Having actually suffered with this disease in our family, like so many of us, what I can tell you is that the only real solution with cancer is detecting it early, and that's where we believe we've made a very significant breakthrough.
So let's dive into that a little bit further, because, frankly, till now, how do you detect cancers early if you don't actually feel a lump? Till now, it was about either feeling a lump or having symptoms of some sort or the other and then figuring out what to do about it. Now, if you can actually catch it so much earlier and by something as simple as a blood test, is that what you're saying it could now be possible?
So, Vikram, let me put out my claims first, my bold claims first, and then I'll explain to you what is different about our technology versus all other liquid biopsy companies that you might have heard of. There are 3 global firsts that we claim. This is the first pan-cancer blood test. It detects all cancers from a blood test, but interestingly, we can detect it before the tumor forms, right, when it is still PET negative. At this stage, we can tell you that you're at imminent threat of cancer, and we can tell you which cancer and where it is growing straight from a blood test. That's claim 1. Claim 2, this is the first prognostic test for cancer. From a blood test, not only can I tell you that you do not have cancer, I can tell you that you're not at risk of cancer for the next 1 year, because we know the pace at which these markers grow. So if you're within a safe zone, we know that the fastest cancer doesn't move from here to a tumor stage in 1 year. So you can see the use case of a test like that. It's like a blood test that all of us will do once a year, and we will either catch cancer at stage 1 or before, when it is infinitely more curable. That's claim 2. Claim 3, and this is actually very useful for oncologists, we can in fact give you mutations and dysfunctional pathways that you typically get from a biopsy of a tumor tissue, except we can give it to you from a blood sample. Now, having said this, the first question that will be striking you is, how is this possible? Right? We're not magicians, nor are we the smartest people in the world. We were essentially a drug company that was looking at a cancer drug. And when we were studying the pathways, we realized that it was acting on certain stem cells. And we realized that there's an epigenetic change or a mutation that's happening on these stem cells, which is creating cancer stem cells. The cancer stem cells are creating cancer cells. Right? Then 1 billion cancer cells come together to form a tumor and form a lump, as you said. Right? At which stage, it will start shedding its outer layers at a furious pace. Nearly 1 million CTCs are shed. A mature tumor sheds about 1 million CTCs a day. Right? Now, all liquid biopsy companies were essentially looking for these resultant markers, these tumor bits in the blood. And the challenge was that at early stages, at stage 1 and stage 2, you don't see them enough in the blood. Right? Yeah. So you were always going to detect it later at stage 3, stage 4. While we had stumbled on to a causative marker, right? These changes are happening before the tumor forms.
Actually, let me just try and summarize that for people who are watching this. You're saying changes start to happen, then the tumor comes, and then the tumor starts to shed cells, and that's when people are able to start spotting it. Now, you're saying that your test will be able to spot the cancer even before the tumor has been formed. There's no cancer anyway, there's no sign of cancer anyway. You're probably a year away from that cancer, but you're being able to spot those changes. Did I understand you correctly in that?
Correct. And the importance of this is, by the time the tumor forms, we are getting very loud signals, right? And furthermore, please appreciate that we are getting a reading for non-cancer. Understand that the tumor-based approach, the tumor bits, the absence of tumor bits in the blood indicates non-cancer. While we get a reading from a patient that he does not have cancer. Absence of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence. And that is why we get so much more sensitivity compared to other liquid biopsy companies if you look at our clinical trial reports.
Ashish, I know you're going in for NHS trials right now. What is your expected timeline? How soon before people are actually able to start using this test?
So Vikram, we've already launched this service in India, right? And interestingly, there was one specific problem that we actually had, that we had a capacity constraint, because this is a molecular test, right? We unfortunately could process very few samples, right? But we have imported certain machines from the US. In fact, we're one of the first, we are the first company in this country to have imported this specific machine. And we are looking at a situation where we will be able to scale or automate our process in our labs. So we will be probably able to do about 100 samples a day by the end of this quarter, right? And then of course, what our board is talking about is how can we actually create a number of labs, because this can save a lot of lives. I mean, it's just a non-invasive blood test, and if you can detect it early, you'll save a lot of lives.
All right, Ashish Tripathi, thank you so much for joining us, and all the best with those NHS trials and the other trials that you're doing. Thank you so much for joining us, Ashish. And finally, a compelling and gripping crime drama has captivated audiences with its very authentic depiction of Punjab, exceptional performances and well-crafted characters. I'm talking about Kohra, which premiered on Netflix last week and revolves around a murder investigation of a young NRI man just before his wedding in rural Punjab. Now, people have been raving about this because of what they're calling its intriguing storyline and how Kohra has delved deep into the complexities of culture, of crime, of drugs, migration, homosexuality. And people are also talking about how there seems to be layers of depth in every single character. And that's why it's a great pleasure to welcome onto this program Barun Sobti, who's of course one of the lead actors in Kohra, and also Sudeep Sharma, the creator and the scriptwriter of Kohra. I'm going to start with you, Sudeep, because I think one of the most impressive things that's been happening right now, and I'm sure you must be very happy about it, is the amount of attention and interest and focus that is now being given to the script itself, to the writing, to the plot, to the storyline. That seems to be really quite literally be getting a lot of the attention in shows like Kohra and others. You must be happy to see that.
I mean, it's been slowly changing, you know, from the time I started working. It's almost been 20 years now. I think it's slowly year by year. I think scripts are getting more and more notice. Writers are getting more and more notice, and that's been a big welcome change in cinema in Bombay and in India, I would say. I mean, I saw it with Udta Punjab. There's writing got a lot of attention. Then there was with Patallo, and now with Kohra again, you know, and not just my own projects, but also other projects that you see, other work that you see getting appreciated, and that's great actually.
Right, Barun, so when you see the sort of response that comes to shows like Kohra, again, it's the realism also in the acting. Your acting, for example, is being praised for the realism that you portray. All sides of a character, all shades of a character. It's not just that old Marco hero whom you become so used to seeing unidimensional characters. Is that something that you think is increasingly becoming central to shows like this?
Yeah, increasingly compared to how it used to be, of course. But then the point is that not every filmmaker is the same. Like with Sudeep and the whole gang, like we were given the freedom to just go, you know, to what you really think about the character. You know, we discussed it way too much before we started, and everyone was on the same page. I was over the moon with the kind of liberties we had with respect. There was not a set pattern. We were told something, then you know, all the actors brought something. It was seen, it was mildly tweaked and corrected, and you know, that's the amount of liberty we had. But that's not the case everywhere, no. And I think every project also demands a different kind of direction or understanding of the script. But here it was very liberating, and yeah, increasingly that's happening. Yeah.
But let me just take that forward. I think the aspect which I'm talking about are the layers to a character. For example, your character in Kohra has been described in reviews as being macho and vulnerable at the same time. Now, they are two far ends of the spectrum. You're displaying them in one character.
So see, the display comes later. First, the writing comes, and you know, with the way it was written, and to be honest with you, we didn't deviate much from the writing. Actually, it was pretty close to verbatim what we shot, and it was so well written that you know it only encourages you and gives you you know I don't know how to say it, but I think the display of the acting, I mean, it comes later. It's just that it was written so well, and I'm not being modest. I'm not taking anything away from myself, but it was just too well written. It would have been a shame it was not performed well.
Shreeb, let me just stick with that theme of realism. Now, there was a time when people went to the movie hall or watched soaps on television, essentially for escapism. Their life was tough, they're having problems day to day. So when you go to a movie theater, you're watching a TV soap, you want escapism, you want to get away from reality. But the sort of shows and programs that you, for example, make, they're about the underbelly, they're about the nitty-gritty of actual life, they're about the grittier side of life, and yet somehow they seem to be being appreciated and watched.
Yeah, I think there is room for all kinds of cinema and all kinds of storytelling to exist. And I think that's what, I mean, you're right, you know, our cinema was more or less unidimensional till one point of time where I understand that escapism is sort of one of the ways to go about cinema, and that it has always been an escapist medium. But there are also, there are also other niches. There are also other ways of telling a particular story, and that, I think, especially with OTT, it just becomes more and more easy because there are all kinds of audiences and all kinds of tastes, and you have to cater to all of them, right? And that makes it easy for you to what happens in the case of theater, which is still what we see, in our theatrical films, is that, oh, you need to get so many people into the theater, and they wouldn't come in, and there's not room enough for niche. But with OTT, it's possible to make different kinds of cinema with very different tastes and very different sort of levels of realism in it, and it would, if it's a good show or a good story, it would probably still be lapped up, and that's a big change. And I think it started about 20-25 years back, with films like Bandit Queen and Satya and Makbul, and then slowly, like, the next generation of writers and filmmakers, people like me and Randeep, we are sort of, just taking on the mantle taking on the mantle forward, really.
Varun, is that true in acting as well? I mean, when you're now doing a role, are you conscious that you should try and make it as realistic and as lifelike as possible, as opposed to being, the hero, larger than life character, maybe hamming it up a bit?
Yeah, that does not interest me. So a lot of people take that approach, but like the approach is different with every character. Our character, the approach was exactly as you said, can't be the unidimensional, a cop who's going to just, thump everyone and, but beating up 50 people kind of a thing. We had to bring in the vulnerability, the likability. So there were so many layers. I, for one, actually haven't worked a lot. The reason for that has been that I wanted to do complex characters, and they were not enough, to be honest with you. I was offered a lot of stuff. I didn't work for 5 years almost because there was nothing that was complex or challenging, and stuff like that. So yeah, it's changing. The approach of the actor and the character both matter a lot.
Sudeep, a lot of what you seem to be doing is almost journalistic, if I can use that phrase in a manner. I remember Patal Lok I found particularly fascinating because when I was personally a young cub reporter, I spent a lot of time chasing Dadua Dacoit all across the jungles in Allahabad, trying to get an interview with him a long time back. And a lot of that was displayed in Patal Lok. Now, similarly, here in Kohrra, the sort of things that you're displaying about rural Punjab and cultural attitudes and mores out there, we've seen a lot of that journalistically in the killing of Sidhu Moosewala and other such stories that have hit the newspapers in the recent times.
Yeah, I'm actually I'm really interested in a journalistic approach to storytelling. I'm like my idol when it comes to writing, screenwriting is David Simon, the guy who created The Wire and a lot of other stuff like that. And I was really taken in by this journalistic approach to writing and journalistic approach to looking at societies, to looking at how crime affects societies and how these institutions of societies, be it the police or be it the politicians, be it these various, how they sort of coexist and intersect each other and influence each other. That I try to carry forward in my work, and even if I don't try to, I think it just seeps in. I'm quite enamored and fascinated by, because it's also, we are also, I mean, at least I am trying to understand the country and its complexities through my work, and somehow I feel that this sort of an approach is best suited for that.
Varun Chopti, Sudeep Sharma, thank you both so much for joining us on the program. Thanks a lot. And that's all we have for you on this episode of The India Story. But we'll be back again next week, tracking the biggest stories coming out of India and the biggest newsmakers as well. Do remember to tune in for that. But for the moment, goodbye.